Hello and welcome back to the Diplomatic Talk program. In this episode, we are going to talk about the United Nations function in Uzbekistan, its role and what kind of works have been done. But before we proceed, let's explore the United Nations. Every person at least once heard about the UN or the United Nations. However, what is the UN and what are its functions? Considering the current challenges that the world is facing today, how effective is the organization? In this program, you will find the answers for these and other questions. In 1945, following the end of World War II, the United Nations was established as the international organization. Its primary aim was to promote peace, security, and cooperation among nations. The creation of the UN was seen as a response to the failures of the League of Nations in preventing conflicts and ensuring global stability. Representatives from 50 countries came together to draft the UN Charter, a foundational document that outlined the organization's principles and structure. The UN Charter was signed on June 26, 1945 in San Francisco and officially came into effect on October 24 in 1945. When it comes to the achievements of the United Nations, they are several. For instance, during the Cold War, the United Nations developed the Secretary General's Good Offices diplomacy, which aimed to prevent conflicts through quiet negotiations. Additionally, the United Nations improvised peacekeeping operations, which helped build confidence between warring parties and facilitated truces and ceasefires. The United Nations also played a role in decolonization, although the determination of colonized peoples and the high cost of maintaining colonial dominance were significant factors. The United Nations membership became a symbol of independence and a diplomatic asset for countries facing threats to their territorial integrity. The principle of universal membership protected candidates from ideological vetoes by the superpowers, resulting in a majority of developing countries joining the UN. The United Nations is also a huge step forward in establishing universal human rights with the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It also established specialized funds and programs focused on humanitarian and development work, addressing issues such as children's rights, refugees, population, and food security. In 2015, UN adopted Sustainable Development Goals to address global challenges. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are an urgent call for action by all countries developed and developing in a global partnership. They recognize strategies to improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth. All while tackling climate change and working to preserve oceans and forests. Uzbekistan's objectives to reach SDG goals include becoming a high middle-income country by 2030, reducing poverty and inequality, and implementing structural reforms in various sectors. They are focusing on improving the business climate, stimulating entrepreneurship, attracting investment, and enhancing healthcare and education system. The country is also prioritizing human rights, gender equality, and strengthening international cooperation. In the 2023 SDG Index rating published by the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network and international experts, Uzbekistan ranked 69th among 166 countries with a score of 71.1. The country improved its position by 8 lines compared to the 2022. Last year, Uzbekistan was ranked 77th with a score of 69.9. Dear viewers, our today's guest, Sabine Machel, resident coordinator of UN to Uzbekistan. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I know that you came here just recently. Can we start about talking, how was your first impression when you just arrived here? I know that you've been working in Central Asia before.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having invited me on the program. I have just arrived actually 3 weeks ago, exactly. I started my work here on the 1st of June. And I have not been in Uzbekistan for a very long time. My last time was probably some 14, 15 years ago. So of course my first impression was, wow, so much progress that has been made in the last years. It is really very impressive. And of course my other impression was that it was very hot. I came from my previous duty station. I came directly from Tbilisi. I was working in Georgia as the resident coordinator for 5 years and just came directly from Tbilisi to Tashkent. So I'm very happy to be here. And as you said, I have been working in Central Asia before, but that was a long time ago. So it's really a pleasure and it's a privilege to be back.
When I read your biography, there was I understood that you've been working in international relations sector, in international organizations for over 22 years. So my question is, in your opinion, what are the main criteria of working in such organizations?
Well, I always, when I was small, I always wanted to work somehow internationally. I'm coming from a very small place in Austria. I'm Austrian, from a really little village when I always say there's more cows than people, and that's really true. And I was always dreaming of, maybe going abroad and doing something else. But, in the village, this was not the usual pathway of what people would do. So when I grew up and I was then studying, I studied law and I studied also languages. I studied teaching languages, English and Russian, for kids aged 10 to 18 years old. I was not really thinking that I would come into, the international realm. I was becoming a judge. I was doing my court practice, and then the Austrian state actually joined the European Union at the time, and they were looking for some people. And I applied and I was taken in the foreign ministry to work there. And I liked it a lot, actually, the exposure to many languages, to many different people from other countries. And so this is how I did not go back to the court, but I actually continued my career in the international sphere. I worked for quite a long time in the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. This is also when I was working here in Central Asia. And I joined the United Nations in 2012. Actually, my agency before I joined as a resident coordinator was UN Women. And this is where I worked. I worked in Kyrgyzstan, then I went to Palestine, and then to Indonesia. In Indonesia, I actually did the assessment center for becoming a resident coordinator. And then I was offered Georgia to go there for 5 years, and this is now my second time as a resident coordinator.
We ask almost all diplomats here, what are the advantages and disadvantages of working in this international arena, as international organizations?
If we start with the advantages, I think you learn a lot throughout your whole life, because you always get to know new people, you get to know new cultures, you learn new languages, right? You're getting familiar with different continents even. I mean, I was in different continents in the Middle East when I was in Palestine, and then also in Asia with Indonesia. But of course, Central Asia is between this bridge between Europe and also Asia. So I like this a lot, and I think it gives you personally a lot of opportunities of really questioning certain things, also changing opinions. This is the very positive aspects. The more challenging ones is always when you also have a family. In my case, I also have a husband and 2 children. This is always a bit challenging because the family comes with you, but it's each time you have to take them out of school, they have to leave their friends, they have to get familiar in a new place, in a new school. So this is a bit more complicated, I think, on the private life. But so far we have managed to always go as a package in our family. So we have always been in duty stations, where we can go, where I can go with the family. And they have been with me to all my places where I've been working. Yeah.
You mentioned about your family, and I just remembered, and I just thought about, unfortunately today, especially in our region, it is not very common that women can manage their work and their family simultaneously. It is very hard for women here. Was it hard for you as a woman to work in such a high position and at the same time manage your family?
Yes, but what you're saying, you have to ask my husband and my children and to have to ask them, because they complain and they often say, oh God, Sabine, when you come home, you also manage us as if we are your office. We are not your office, right? So I think it has definitely some, there are some shortcomings because it's difficult, right? When you're not so much at home, when it's also often in the evenings there is, certain functions that you need to carry out. So this is definitely a downside, I think. And I think it's not only in these functions, it's in general, I think, not only in Uzbekistan, it's all over the world. I think it's still difficult for women to kind of, bear this kind of, on the one hand, having a job, earning the money, but then also caring for the children, caring for the elderly, very often at home, your parents. The housework. So I was actually very happy and I'm lucky, I think, because my husband is also helping a lot on these things. So we are, he's helping a lot with bringing the kids to the school, with also cooking at home and doing these sort of things. Because otherwise I think it would not be so easy and it would be even harder, if this is all on you, basically.
So this both parties are working together, not just one side.
Yes.
This is interesting. You also mentioned that you've been working to UN Women, and what was your position here? What you've been doing? Were you assessing the women all over the in European Union, or it was something related to Central Asia?
UN Women is actually the youngest UN organization. It was created only in 2010, and it came because many women's organizations said we would like to have something in the United Nations that really promotes the empowerment of women. And this means all over the world, right, wherever we are. Because if we are continuing with the progress on gender equality as we currently do, it takes 300 years. And I think this is a bit too long for everybody. And so therefore, UN Women was created really with the view to see in different countries how can we empower women wherever they are, right? In their cultures, in their traditions, in the countries where they live. So it was very different, the work actually that we were carrying out, for instance, in Palestine. It was a lot about the rule of law. And also we have been working with the police, for instance, the law enforcement bodies in Palestine. We had a very big program there, and even the Palestinian police then adopted at some point the gender strategy. In Indonesia, we have been working more on some of the areas of how we can support the prevention of violent extremism. This was a big program that we had as UN Women there. In Kyrgyzstan, we had a program that was geared towards the economic empowerment of women, in particular rural women. So it really depends on the country, where some of the areas are where we think we can help the best. And it's always an issue, I think, all over the world actually, to find a way of how we can accelerate this equality of opportunities, so that every man and every woman can actually, work in the areas that they are the most talented for and they want to work in.
So now we are going to move to second stage of our interview. This is more of bilateral relations and etc. So my first question is how UN and Uzbekistan cooperates their initiatives and plans together. How does it work? Can you explain it?
Here in Uzbekistan, we are currently in the 4th year of implementing our cooperation framework. So this is a 5-year-long framework which was signed back in 2020 and has started in 2021 and is currently running in the 4th year until the end of next year. And this framework kind of goes into 3 different directions. One is really very much focused on the good governance side. The second one is focused on the human capital and also, how people can be helped out of the informal into the formal economy. And the last stream, if you like, is focused on the climate and everything that is related to climate change, to environmental challenges and so on. And these 3 areas we are working on together with 18 different funds and programs of the United Nations that are based here in Uzbekistan. And there are 7 others that also work on Uzbekistan, but they are placed somewhere else. They are outside, they are maybe from Geneva or from other areas where they also work. And this framework was agreed together with the government. What are the areas that we would like to support Uzbekistan on in reaching the Sustainable Development Goals? The 2030 Agenda, which the whole world has agreed on, is currently a little bit under threat because unfortunately we are off track. Many of these goals are not in so close reach, and on some of the goals we even are going backwards when we compare to 2015 when they were adopted. So this is where we try to support Uzbekistan in reaching the 2030 Agenda. There's also the National Vision Plan on 2030, so which is completely aligned with the SDGs. And this is how we work from the different mandates of the different organizations to reaching those goals, those sustainable development goals. And Uzbekistan has a very ambitious plan of becoming an upper middle income country by 2030. So this is also when this Agenda 2030 should be reached. But at the moment we are globally really not on track. Only about 15% of the goals are on track. And the others are either very, very slow or showing no progress, and some of them are even going back to under the baseline that we had in 2015.
The next question is how UN supports Uzbekistan in achieving all of those SDGs goals.
So one way is programs and projects that we are together working out, with the government, with the civil society, with the academia, to really see where are the areas that we should focus on. It can also be by supporting legislative changes. I mean, Uzbekistan is currently carrying out so many reforms, really structural reforms. So we also try to support where we can in these areas. As we are a world organization, Uzbekistan is also part of us, of the 193 states. We can also learn maybe from other states what has worked, what is not working, and showing some of these good practices and supporting those reforms that are actually going towards really more gender equality, a better environment, reaching the Sustainable Development Goals, that people also feel the difference. That's the most important in our work.
When I was doing research, I saw that majority of the support is going to health and well-being of citizens of Uzbekistan. Why do you think it is so?
This is one area that we pay a lot of attention to, education and health, as you were mentioning, because Uzbekistan has a very young population. 60% are under 30 years old. This is what I have read. So to really enable every young person to get access to a quality education and to quality health care, I think is something very important and has definitely a transformative effect on reaching the 2030 Agenda. So, I mean, this is something which needs quite a complex approach because you need, of course, teachers, right? I mean, as I said, I'm also a teacher. I feel very strongly about this because I believe in education, the teacher is the most important ingredient. Sure. We all remember when we were in school, we remember our teachers, right? In a positive or in a negative manner. But I think very often we even like sometimes subjects because we like the teachers. So I think this is a really important profession in any country in the world. And I mean, how our children, when they go to school, there are a lot of time, you know, that they pass there. I think this is really important, the teacher training, the retraining, finding also new methods, new teaching, you know, pedagogics, how to actually do the teaching. And therefore, this is an area where several of our agencies are working, you know, notably UNICEF or UNESCO, you might have heard. There is also the work on the vocational training, which is very important, which is to becoming a mechanic or to becoming a carpenter, and you know how to learn these skills. There are also the colleagues, for instance, in UNDP who are working on that together, of course, with many others. And the health sector, we have seen after the pandemic with COVID, of you know how we were really the whole world was actually had suffered from what has happened with this pandemic. So I think health is also something that is very, very important for everybody, and we only notice it when we don't have it, how important it is for the well-being of everyone.
Can you provide some examples of successful partnership between the United Nations and Uzbekistan?
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of very successful partnerships because all these programs are done in partnership, right? Also with the government, yes, because this is our cooperation framework. But I think also Uzbekistan is a country that really underlines and understands the multilateralism and the importance that in nowadays world everything is so complex and no country can solve the issues alone anymore. We have become so interdependent. We see the climate change, it's not just affecting one country, it's affecting everybody. And Uzbekistan has been very active in the United Nations also for sponsoring General Assembly resolutions. Recently there were several of those. It has been very active also, for instance, in proposing this Day of Dialogue for Civilizations for the 10th of June, just last week, right? This is the new initiative that was done by Uzbekistan and China to make the 10th of June this day on how we need to talk to each other, and we need to understand, and respect how we live in the different parts of the globe. There have been a number of those areas. Uzbekistan was also elected to the ILO as a vice chair and also to the ECOSOC for the first time. So really, I think it's very important to share this experience also with others and to, show in this world community of also what Uzbekistan is doing. I think this has been really remarkable, and since I've come here, this has been one of the things that I have seen. This was a very, very nice, nice situation to come into, actually.
Today there are a lot of global tensions in different parts of the world, and everyone, I think, started to question the work of the UN. And I think it is going to be interesting for our viewers as well. What do you think? Why these things are happening and people are starting questioning the work of the UN? What do you think? Is it failing as an organization?
The United Nations can only be as strong as the member states want it to be, right? I mean, this is very important. It's an intergovernmental organization where the states have come together when it was created. This is very important. And you're right, I think it's very much challenged on many fronts. But I would say, if you take it from the other side, if it was not there, we would need to create it, right? We would need this platform where we can actually all come together, different values from different continents, from different countries, where we need to see where is it that we as humans are all united, and where is it coming from? And we all go down, no matter whether, if you have grown up here in Uzbekistan, or me who has grown up in Austria. I think our moms and dads have said the same things to us when we were small, right? I mean, we will all get the same messages, don't lie, don't steal, be nice to your brother and sister, respect your mom and dad and your grandparents. And I mean, it's the same. And then we are just socialized in different directions depending on where we are in the world. But it's always coming down to us as humans. And this humanity, I think, is really at the center of the United Nations. And we sometimes forget about this because it's all being drawn in all sorts of directions, and things are being used and politicized, and we are not really going down to who we are as people. And I think this is what the United Nations is about.
So it's more about the will of the countries, not the organization as it is.
I think, of course, we have seen as you were saying, a lot of tensions, a lot of things that have happened in the last few years in particular. It is very unfortunate that we do not learn from history, right? We're making the same mistakes again. The Charter has been violated. It's a permanent struggle. But I think it is important to keep the states also accountable through the United Nations and through the Security Council. And I mean, this is the one thing that we have as an instrument, which is global and which is really all-encompassing. So to really, come around those areas and maybe see how they can be reformed. What are some of the areas that this becomes more agile? Maybe there must be, there is definitely discussions going on in New York, in the headquarters of the UN, of what can be done in this direction. But I think it is a very important institution for everyone, actually, still on the world. And yes, I think it can be improved, obviously, on many fronts. But I think the essence is really important, that we actually sit down together, that we find solutions, that there is difficult challenges. And I do not see any other options than really,
Thank you very much. That was an amazing interview.
Yeah,
it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on this diplomatic journey. Stay tuned for our next episodes.